All right, so this is going to be a fun show because we're going to be talking about the craziness of just complexity and confusion and making that super simple. I know for me, even early in my career as a financial advisor, it's been something I've been pretty passionate about. And I believe, Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And your son, Caleb. This is going to be fun to interview you guys. You guys are in Michigan.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And Ben, how long have we been working together now?
It has been since 2017, 2018.
Wow,
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah.
Time flies.
It does.
Has it really been that long? Oh my
think so.
gosh. Really?
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
I think that's when we first talked.
Wow, that is a long time ago. So, all right, so we're going to be jumping into this crazy topic. If you think about just about any industry, like technology, I mean, how many people are confused? They're like, how do I turn it on? Like a computer,
Yeah, this guy, right?
video cameras, phones, whatever. You're like, what do I do?
Yeah.
And then obviously something near and dear to us is money.
Mm-hmm.
And how confusing can money be? You look at, a trading screen and people are like, whoa. Or you even look at, Google, what should I invest at this age or that age? And you're like, oh my God, it's just overwhelming amounts of information. So how do you, as a financial advisor, help turn something that's super confusing into something that's easy to understand?
Yeah, great question. I think, a couple of things that are really important is if you can take concepts based on something dealing with their life, like maybe their vocation or something you can associate with like a word picture with something they already know and can understand and somehow associate it with money. Sometimes that can help bridge a gap. Because I think you're right. I think that when it comes to financial planning or being in the financial world, Wall Street, I think it really makes its money on selling something called complexity. Is what I think they sell.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think complexity is the theme because then people will feel helpless in their ability to understand what to do and that you need someone else.
Which is so interesting. So early in my career as a financial advisor, which is so great because you're so young and you're not going to be brought into the business this way, I was almost taught that if you do your job well, you will help every customer, every client of yours understand how entirely difficult this business is. And you're going to let them know, like, this is so big, so complicated, you can't do it without me.
Right.
That's how I was trained.
Right.
That is nothing of what we do now.
Mm.
But the reality of how I was brought into this business is you bring up the overwhelming nature of how big and broad and complicated and complex this business is. And the better you do that, the more likely you are to close this client.
Right.
Oh man, that is so bad.
It's so backwards.
Right.
So backwards.
Yeah.
And from a younger perspective, somebody who you're not taught the world of finance when you're in school or when you're coming up mainly, and you find talking with people in a much older age bracket than me, they're just as little educated as I am or as I was when it comes to this business. And it's incredible to me. I'm like, okay, like this is not a hard thing to understand, but it's just not in the mainstream of how people are taught or educated.
Well, actually, even to build on that, what's even more frustrating is even when you take your licenses to become an advisor in this business, the professor or the class teacher, whoever will even say, listen, I'm not telling you how to be a financial advisor. I'm telling you how to pass the test.
Correct.
Because the test world is completely different than the real world.
So
and
true.
as a financial advisor, I'm like, wait, what? And then you get, I was hired at Morgan Stanley right out of college, and I got my license while I was working there. And as soon as I got licensed, my boss was like, now forget everything you just did to pass that test because it has nothing to do with what you're going to do on a practical standpoint.
I was told
with your
that
clients.
too when I entered this industry.
Like, what?
Yeah.
Everything's so backwards. You don't do any school, any financial classes in high school, nothing in college. I mean, you can do finance, but it's more like
right. That's not a general ed. You have to go into the specialty to take the classes for it.
And I never took any of those classes. I have no idea if they're actually applicable.
Right.
I went into psychology. I learned about the brain and the psychology of people and the makeup. I think that was actually more useful,
right? Yeah.
Than anything I would have learned in like math class, for our business. Because you don't even, math is a big part of what we do.
It's basic though,
but
it's not
understanding financials and knowing how to to determine if a good stock is a bad stock and putting together a portfolio, or even more complicated is the planning aspect. And there's definitely an overwhelming nature to what we do, because it's, how do you figure out what's wrong with somebody? And then when you figure out what's wrong, how do you determine what would be appropriate to recommend, and then when do you make adjustments? I mean, just those three things, it's like, how do you do that?
Right.
We figured it out, thank to God, to glory.
God, yeah.
But at the end of the day, like, that's not an easy thing.
No, I think one thing too that makes our job really difficult, more so it's not just the planning aspect, but it's not really anyone's fault, but there's so much fear in people when it comes to doing this, that's really what you're helping people navigate through, is the emotions they already come to the table with before you even start any planning process.
Where's that come from you? Is there anything in your past, that made you passionate about this particular topic?
Sure. I would say that, you learn over time. One of the epiphanies I had was that, before these people even come to my office or I sit down with them at the kitchen table, they've already been inundated with how many messages from different companies and products and things, and how many of them have been taken advantage of, how many people have been let down, or they've been cheated, scams out there. And so their guard is already up before we even talk to them. And that to me was like an aha moment of, how can I help people navigate through those feelings they're already having? Because they're probably going to look at me that way when they first meet me and maybe already have that guard up. How can I help build that trust and that connection? Because that's when it really got to me that's about 90% of what I do is the relationship. The other 10%, the planning, that becomes much easier if you can build the rapport.
I know you have a background in education, and I don't think I actually put the connection together until I just heard you say that. I grew up in the church. My dad was a pastor.
Me too.
I was always involved. I didn't always go to the same church as my parents, because we didn't always have the best youth group in our church, or the church that my dad was associated with. So I always went to, like, where's the big youth group that had all the pretty girls, right?
Yep.
So, but I was always like a part of the youth group. I was always a youth group leader. I was the most outgoing. I was always like in the front, like in the door, and I led Bible studies and different things. And just when you were saying that, it was reminding me of the challenge of taking something that is so not complex, because the Bible is just perfect, but there's so much depth to it. And when you're going to teach something in a Bible study to kids, because then even in college, I was even after college, even when I was a young financial advisor, I was always a part of a college ministry or student ministry. And taking something that is so dense, of so much richness of the Bible, and then trying to teach a simple topic takes so much time, because you're like, how do I boil this down to like something a kid can take away and keep them entertained and engaged for like 30 minutes. Right. That is very difficult to do. And then just hearing you talk, I'm like, wow, I actually started doing that at like 12 years old.
Right.
And then started doing that. And actually from 12 to probably 28, 29, 30, I did that because I was a leader, or even Bible study leader, even now in my 40s. It's just been a part of my life, taking things that are super complicated, complex, deep, rich, and go, okay, what's the one nugget?
Yeah.
And there's hundreds of them, right?
Right.
Thousands, millions. What's the one thing that's impressed on my heart that I feel this person needs to hear, or I want to communicate, or God's laid in my heart? And now we're doing that on the financial world, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, they're coming in. What's the one thing that I could really help them with? And for me, right away, it's what's their problem? Because when somebody comes to see us, you have the same issue. It's like, how can I really impact their life?
Yeah.
Because whether or not they hire me, I have a job, a calling, a responsibility to help them. And that doesn't mean I have to sell them. All that means is I have to help them. Yeah. So they come to me, it's like, what can I really do to position them for prosperity, even if they don't hire me? And we've wrapped that up into one little word called shortfall.
Right.
And it's helping them understand their problem.
Yep.
And God did a cool thing on how we arrived there.
Yep.
Even before we ever called it shortfall, even when we call it shortfall, I'm like, when have you ever used the word shortfall?
Right.
And yet it's so fundamental to what we do, because so many clients will come in, we'll do a plan, we help them understand their shortfall, and they're like, you're the first person ever helped me understand why I feel the way I do. I can't sleep, I'm uncomfortable, I know something's wrong, but no advisor, no person's ever said, this is it so clearly.
You can put your finger right on it.
Yep.
Here it
Yeah.
is, and you can see it.
And then they're like, that's it, and
Right.
we're like, yes, and we haven't done anything. They
Right.
haven't said yes, there's no
Right.
client, there's no recommendation.
But the light bulb went off. The
Mhm.
education took place. The
Yeah.
illumination in their heart. Like,
And
I
the
get it.
ownership.
Right.
They're
Right.
just like, as a kid,
Right.
when I would do a Bible study, lesson, or I was, and afterwards somebody would come up to me or write me an email. They probably just called me, actually. Texts weren't even out there. Yeah, totally dating myself right now. I want to say they emailed me, but I don't think they did. But they would come up to me and pull me aside that day, or, a week later, 2 weeks later, and like, hey, when you said this, like, God really worked in my heart. And that's where that moment, it's not I did it, it was God did it. But at the end of the day, it's like they learned, they grew. And I feel that same way as an advisor.
You and I have very similar journeys as I'm listening to you talk, because I was a youth pastor for my first 10 years of my career.
Mm.
And so that's everything.
I
you're
don't
saying.
think I knew that.
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome.
That's what I did. So you and I are very similar. And I felt there was no greater satisfaction than when I could look out and you could see the illumination go off in someone's heart and mind. They're like, I get this.
Yes.
That connection was made. And I knew for the rest of my life that no matter what I did, that's what I wanted to see. I knew was my mission to help.
And we get to
people
do that
see
every day.
Exactly.
Right.
It is incredibly satisfying when you're in front of somebody and you're helping them navigate the planning, the complexity of planning, and are boiling it down so simple, helping them understand their shortfall, showing a pathway to solving that shortfall, and letting them understand what they can do, empowering them.
Yeah.
They don't have to hire us. The satisfaction isn't them asking me or them signing on the dotted line to become a client. The satisfaction is like, hey, they get it, they own it, they want to fix it, and now they're vested.
Yeah.
So the satisfaction is like, okay, we're going to do, this is my plan. They're looking at the screen and they're like, that's it. That's what I want to do. And I'm like, we just did this,
Right.
And it doesn't even matter if they say yes, because I know their life is now on a different trajectory,
Right.
because they understand it, they know what to do to fix it, and they're going to take action,
They found
whether or
their
not
true
they hire
north.
us.
They
Right.
found their true north and
Yeah.
just redirected them.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
Yeah, I think I could speak for all three of us. Like, it just comes from, again, you're not trying to sell them something. It's the underlying desire to serve and educate the afflicted in this field.
Mhm.
And, how can we really help them? Because the satisfaction, again, doesn't come from them saying yes and working with us. It comes from giving them the education and helping them realize where their shortfall is or where their problem is, and then really helping them. You were a youth pastor for a decade. You were doing that since you were 12 years old, right? Me being younger, I'm just now doing that. I serve in my high school youth group, and I am understanding what you're speaking on. Like, I get that satisfaction. I was just speaking with a group the other night, like 2 weeks ago, and I had that moment where the illumination moment. I'm like, oh, that's what this is about, right? In that aspect, or even in this business, what we're talking about, it's the people business. We're not in the finance. Whatever you're doing, you're in the people business, right? And you have to really care and love and value people if you're going to do it well, right? I think the greatest value you can bring, sure, education, sure, can be knowledge, right? But it's the value of yourself and, doing your job vulnerably and sharing your personal experience with them and bringing yourself to the table too when you're meeting with these people.
You use the word vulnerability. Where does vulnerability play a role in helping people understand something complicated?
Well, I think sharing personal stories, like when he was sharing about, I wasn't taught about money in school and all these things. Neither was I.
Neither was I.
This is an
Yeah.
epidemic, this problem, right? And so being able to, I had to unlearn and learn myself over the course of my life as a younger man about how to do this stuff that now I'm able to share with other people. But I'll share vulnerably with some clients like, hey, you don't get this, don't worry. I didn't get this for a long time either. just being real vulnerable and saying, look, I had to learn this stuff too.
I was actually say some of my most exciting meetings
Mhm.
are when a client and or somebody that's not a client will come in, we'll go over something, and they'll ask me a question that I've never either thought about or had no idea how to answer. And I'm like, thank you. Like I'm going to grow here,
Yeah.
because I have never
I had
even
no
thought
idea.
that was, where have I been for 25 years? Like, how did I ever think of that? Like,
Mhm.
and I'm excited to now go on a journey to get them an answer. And I'll just flat out be like, that was brilliant of a question, we're going to figure that out. Like,
Yeah,
I have no idea how
right.
to answer it. I'm going to be transparent. I'm not going to be that guy like, oh, let me make up something on the spot. I'm be like, I have no idea.
Right.
And I can't wait to find that out because I want to tell you because it's going to help me, which ultimately will help everybody else around me.
Right.
So one last thing before we bring this to a close, like, what would you say your broader mission is? Like, as a financial advisor, we all had our stories of, which are very similar, which brought us into becoming a financial advisor. But what would you say, like, what's your mission as a financial advisor? Like, what are you setting out to do?
I think to kind of piggyback off something Kayla was saying, we believe really in the service of people. And as a youth pastor, you really feel like, man, I'm serving the kingdom right now. I'm really helping these people. And that really, as the Lord took me out of that to realize, yep, and the kingdom's working in all these spheres, right? In all these places, finance, education, all these places, and that he has a say and a desire to serve all there and to learn a new language, if you will, and a new way to communicate those principles to people in a new place. And because my mission is really to see that light bulb go off in people and know that their compass has just been shifted. They were headed in a path that wouldn't have been good for them. And now, like a healing took place, if you will, in their life, in a direction. And that's what I'm about. That's what we're about every
love
day.
it.
That's why we get up every day.
That speaks to my heart because
Yeah.
I share very similar. I didn't go to school to be a financial advisor, and yet I could not ever imagine doing anything else.
Right.
I love what I do. God called me to this business. I
Right.
ignored him. I was like, no, I'm going to school to do this, and then God was like, no, you're not. I'm having you do this. And now it's the most passionate, from my vocation. I couldn't imagine doing anything else because of the people, the relationships, the complicated things that we get to do to boil it down to be so simple.
Yeah,
And we affect people's lives, and it is ministry.
it is.
It's the number one topic talked about in the Bible.
It is.
Yep.
So, we get to do real work, serving, loving people, educating people, and it can satisfy the innermost parts of our heart from a godly perspective.
Yeah.
And on an earthly perspective, it helps people out. I mean, it's the best of both worlds.
It
we
is.
got the best career going on around.
Agreed.
So, all right. Well, any last thoughts?
No, I just say I agree with you, and
Yeah.
I just say love everyone always, no exception.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And same. And I'm also doubly blessed. I get to do this with my son.
I know. I
Yeah.
don't think I mentioned that in the beginning that you're father and son.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
Mhm.
that is awesome.
Yeah.
So congrats to you for being in the business. This is awesome. And I cannot believe we've worked together for so long. So that's awesome. So
Yeah.
this has been fun.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for
Thanks.
having us.